I don't even know if this is a political show anymore. I mean, I kind of do half the show is just about making your own personal life better in the here and now. But one of the things that I talk about on my program, two of the things I should say that I talk about is, one of them, we are in a pandemic. We are in the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people have forgotten that. A million people have died. It's rising and accelerating in a lot of areas. Variants are getting out of control. People's rates of vaccination are vastly decelerating. People are not getting vaccinated. Variants are getting worse. But one of the effects of COVID is long COVID, right? You get COVID initially, your acute symptoms last maybe a week, 2 weeks, whatever. Maybe you're asymptomatic and you don't even have any acute symptoms. But all of a sudden, you start feeling, a little bit fucked up. You're like, ugh, feel like shit. Can't get out of bed. Am I depressed? Well, maybe, but you also might have long COVID. And the other thing I talk about on the show is healthy eating. 95% of Americans do not eat fruits or vegetables. Now, how is that possible? I'm not sure. But 95% of Americans, the science studies have suggested that they do not eat fiber. They just don't have any fiber in their diet. What is fiber? Where is it found? Fruits, vegetables, specifically fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So having lettuce on a cheeseburger doesn't count. Sorry. Having one slice of a tomato on a cheeseburger also doesn't count. And so this story that I'm going to talk about here is the intersection of those two things that I talk about very frequently on my program. And this is an article from CNN Health. Healthy lifestyle may mean lower risk of long COVID, study says. Who would have thunk? Well, of course, I would have thunk, because I've been saying this shit for several years. Once I started learning about long COVID, which I started learning about it in 2020, right? And, again, it makes perfect sense. The virus, we know that the virus is able to live and reproduce in other organs in your body up to 8 months after acute infection. Now, when I say up to, that does not mean 8 months. 8 months is a ceiling. It's a little bit weird language, but in the medical journal kind of fields, up to just means that's when the study ended. So we know it can lead up to 8 months, and anything more than that, we haven't really done the research yet. But studies have suggested that the live virus can last in your organs after an acute infection for around 8 months. And again, it could be longer. Data's not in on that, right? But we know as we are right now in society, it's February 2023, we know that the virus can remain and propagate itself in your organs for at least 8 months in some areas. Now, some people didn't have that situation. 4 months later, they were fine. But again, a lot of people that develop long COVID, what's going to be the cause of that? Well, a weakened immune system. When you don't eat fiber, again, 95. Now, you never see, by the way, I've done a lot of videos, and now we're getting into the rant portion. I've done a lot of videos on all of these subjects. COVID, especially. I've done literally hundreds of videos on COVID awareness and protection information. I have never, ever, ever heard or read any of these articles talk about how 95% of Americans are sick all the time. If you don't eat enough fiber, unless you're an edge case, let's say you have irritable bowel syndrome or some other sort of situation where fiber is actually, you know what, you got to find a fiber that works for you. A lot of it, we're not taught, that's an outlier case. But in a situation where 88 to 93% of Americans are chronically sick with a form of metabolic dysfunction, right? Metabolic dysfunction leads to metabolic syndrome. It leads to pre-diabetes. It leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It leads to diabetes. It leads to death. That's the precursor for all of that. 93% of Americans have been found to have some form of metabolic dysfunction, right? So if they're continuing on that path or they're already on that path, they'll have metabolic syndrome, which again results in a lot of chronic inflammation, and inflammation reduces the quality and effectiveness of your immune system, right? So I've never seen any of these articles. I've seen doctors talk about metabolic syndrome and fiber. I've seen doctors talk about it. I've seen scientists talk about it. I haven't seen Tony Fauci talk about any of that. I haven't seen anyone at CNN, any of their doctors. I haven't seen any mainstream media at all. Why? Because they don't want you to understand the link between food and health. Food is medicine. That's what it is. Anything you put into your body is a drug, right? How come consuming pain pills, that's a drug, but consuming sugar pills isn't? Anything you put into your body is a drug. It affects your body. It can either give you energy. It can either take energy away. It can move energy from one place to another. It can, whatever. That's what putting things into your body does. Our body is a complex chemical system. It is a factory. When you put things in one end of the conveyor belt, it's going to affect your body in myriads of different ways, a myriad of different ways, right? And so again, when we have a pandemic, a mass disabling event where most people, their diets are garbage, right? So anyway, let's see what this has to say. People who have a healthy lifestyle before COVID-19 infection may have a lower risk of long COVID than their peers, a new study says. The study, published Monday in JAMA Internal Medicine, looked at almost 2,000 women who reported a positive COVID-19 test between April 2020 and November 21. The participants were enrolled in the Nurses' Health Study 2, which has been surveying more than 100,000 U.S. nurses since 1989. The researchers looked at 6 modifiable lifestyle factors that they defined as healthy. A body mass index between 18 and 24. Now, I will say BMI, body mass index, garbage. BMI is the IQ of physical health, in the sense where the BMI test, the examination, it measures your BMI, and that's it. The IQ test, what does it measure? Does it measure how smart you are? No, it just measures how well you score on the IQ test, right? And now you can use these numbers as a proxy for other things, but again, there's so many people that have a quote-unquote obese BMI, but they're bodybuilders. Or, there's so many people that have a BMI that would say, hey, you are about to pass out because you're dead, you're dying, you're a ghost. And then also you go to the doctor and you're fine. So, again, I just want to say, always view the BMI or just weight in general. Weight in general is not really even remotely a good way to gauge your health. Attaching value to losing weight is a problem that leads to eating disorders. I've been there, so I can tell you that. But again, never smoking, moderate alcohol consumption. Now again, there's lots of gray areas here. What does it mean, never smoking? Like if I smoked one cigarette when I was 14 and said, ugh, that sucks, and then never smoked a single one since, technically, I smoked, right? So again, I'd love to go into the granularity there. Moderate alcohol consumption. What does that mean? I don't know. A high quality diet. Again, high quality. How do we define that? 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night and at least 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So, again, that's why they use so many different kinds of, different index points here, because, the issues with BMI theoretically are, going to be alleviated by the things such as high quality diet and the issue, so they use a different thing here. But again, I think we should be a little bit more clear with how we define these things in general, just as a society, as a culture. So they found that a healthy pre-infection lifestyle was associated with a lower risk of COVID-19 symptoms that lasted 4 weeks or longer. Women who met 5 or 6 of the criteria for a healthy lifestyle had almost half the risk of long COVID as women who met none of the criteria. These associations were mainly driven by healthy body weight and adequate sleep. Now, again, body weight. I think that, all respect to these researchers, but body weight is a symptom of underlying health conditions, right? If you treat and only focus on body weight without focusing on things like food addiction, without focusing on things like metabolic dysfunction, right? That's going to affect the way that your body weight, again, and it's not always tied to health. So there's a lot of I have a huge problem with body weight, in general, being used as a metric for anything. Same thing with calories, but that's a whole different. The women who had a healthier lifestyle and got long COVID had about 30% lower risk of symptoms that interfered with daily life. Now, again, this is a big thing. Symptoms that interfere with daily life. What does that mean? Like, if I have severe neurological distress that manifests in brain fog, that affects my daily life. But let's say I'm still able to go to work. Let's say my job is I'm a janitor, right? So I don't really need to use my brain, too much. Every once in a while, you get a little brain buster, but overall it's mostly you're just acting on impulse, you're on autopilot. Is that a symptom that interferes with your daily life? Typically, when we hear the phrase interference with daily life, that means work. That's based around work. If someone works from home, and let's say they're physically very tired. They can't walk anywhere. It's the opposite. But their brain is perfect, right? But they're just tired physically, but they can work from home. Does that interfere with their daily life? It does. It's hard to go on a walk around the block, but they can work from home, right? So again, oftentimes we really need to define these terms, and as a society and in general, I often hear that phrase to be synchronized with their ability to go to work, which I don't think. I mean, it's a metric that you can track, yes, sure, but I think that interference with daily life should not be a proxy for how well can you work in the capitalist hellhole that we live in. Right? Can you be productive while you're working for your boss? I think we should have, those should just be two separate questions, but oftentimes they're linked. The researchers have speculated that the findings might be partly explained by the link between these lifestyle factors and chronic inflammation, immunity, or blood clotting problems. I have a question. Right? Let's enter the plumbing universe. Has anyone ever had to plunge, or God forbid, snake their toilet? Has anyone ever had this issue? Now, oftentimes, what is the cause? Sometimes, every once in a while, let's be honest, a big fat stinker. It's just too big, right? Like, let's just be real. But sometimes, right, it's other things like toilet paper. You use too much. It kind of clogs up a little bit, right? That kind of stuff, right? So every once in a while, you got to clean that shit out. You got to plunge it, whatever you can. You got to snake the drain. You got to clean it out. Now imagine that's your circulatory system. And imagine that snaking the drain is eating healthy food and only healthy food for a week. Now you might get away with not snaking the drain or using Drano or whatever. You want to use whatever analogy, whatever metaphor or whatever, right? It's possible you can go 30 years without entering an issue. Totally possible. But the problem is bubbling, right? And eventually it will create an issue. It could be as soon as you sell your house and someone moves in and all of a sudden the toilets are clogged, right? But we don't have that with our bodies. We can't just move out of the house and go somewhere else with our bodies, right? And so oftentimes when you eat garbage, it clogs up your arteries. And what that can lead to, if you don't flush the drain, if you don't snake it, if you don't use Drano, if you don't plunge it, eventually what that can do is, again, lead to blood clots. Right? So again, in this instance, snake in the drain is eating nothing but extremely healthy foods for a week. When's the last time you have gone a week without any junk food? Any. Zero. I'm saying zero. Not a little bit, not moderation. Just a week where you have 0% junk food. And again, you can bring the junk food back after that, right? I'm just asking, most Americans, they never go for a week eating zero junk food. Never. A lot of Americans I know, I come from a very poor family. I've been poor most of my life. And I can tell you, a lot of people in my family, never gone a week, even having regular access to food, let alone a healthy set of foods to eat. So most Americans do not have this luxury and or have never tried. Okay? So let's keep going. However, they also noted that these studies' generalizability is limited because it looked only at middle-aged female nurses who are predominantly white. Other limitations include the use of self-reported data and a lack of understanding about the risk of long COVID with different strains of coronavirus. So again, this study, is it the end-all be-all? Of course not, because no single study is ever the end-all be-all. It's always, how do all of the studies in the same area with political polling? Are you going to judge who's going to win the 2024 election based on one Rasmussen poll? No. You're going to use every poll during that election cycle, and even then you might still be wrong. That's called science, right? So again, no single study is perfect, but this also does suggest that a lot of the stuff I have been saying on my show for the last couple of years now seems to be in the right direction. It seems to me that if you eat poison and drugs and are a drug addict, now again, no problem with drug addiction. As someone who used to be addicted to junk food, I used to weigh like 270 pounds, 280 pounds, okay? And I went all the way down to 120. Now, again, that was not healthy. But I've been on both ends of the extreme when it comes to food addiction, fear of food, not wanting to eat because I thought that, food would make me fat and being fat is bad. So I've been on multiple ends of that kind of thing. And, I've got a lot of, when I would not eat for days at a time because I was trying to be, when I was anorexic and I was trying to lose weight, I would pass out. When I was extremely overweight, obese, right, I would more often, I'd have back pain. I'd have foot pain. If I were to take like a 30-minute walk around the block, and it would take me 30 minutes when I was that heavy, I would have foot pain. Like, my feet were in severe agony just because of how large my body was as well as my back. I don't have that anymore. Now, I'm definitely not the thinnest I've ever been. I got a little chunk on the trunk, if you will. But I don't have back pain. I don't have foot pain. I don't have a lot of other issues. I don't have breathing problems, right? And so, no one is perfect. No one's going to be perfect in their health, but there's always harm reduction. And harm reduction pays dividends. If you ever see The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher, imagine that, right? But it's healthy eating choices, right? Hey, just consider it. Let's jump to this quote. In the past decade, scientists have accumulated evidence that healthy lifestyle is good for overall health. Well, who would have thunk? However, in the United States, for example, 70% of the population do not have a healthy body weight, and 30% do not sleep enough. So, the sleep thing, I could do a whole other video on sleep. Sleep is extremely important. To me and just in general. Findings from this study suggest that simple lifestyle changes, such as having adequate sleep, may be beneficial for the prevention of long COVID. But again, all of these things are impossible under a capitalist framework. It's impossible. How are you going to fucking get 8 hours of sleep, 9 hours of sleep when you're working 2 jobs? You can't. So again, you can look more into this study if you'd like. And yeah, it's a little, on my end, it's a little confirmation bias, right? I see stuff like this and it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I've been talking about. So, but it really does make sense. When you eat properly, when you eat good food, forget I said good. When you eat food, it fuels your body. I ask you this. What is the definition of food? And does that definition apply to Wendy's? Because if your definition of food is anything you can put down your throat, is a rock food? What's food, right? Food gives you energy. Does sugar give you energy? Not really. It gives you like a temporary burst of excitement and then it's all gone. That's called a drug. That's called a drug. Food gives you nutrients. Does Wendy's give you nutrients? No. Makes your mouth feel good. The same way smoking a cigarette does something. I don't know. I've never smoked a cigarette personally, so I guess it makes your brain feel good. I don't know what it does. I've never smoked it. But, once again, everything you put in your body should be considered a drug. Everything. You should know. If when people say if you're going to do a drug, to do your own research, we don't want kids to drink alcohol because they don't properly understand what the effects are, like long-term, even short-term, right? You should have that mindset for everything. If you wouldn't want to try heroin because you don't know what it does, think about that box of Ritz crackers that you're munching on because you don't know what that does either. Just be honest. So anyway. Just throwing that out there. That's all I have to say.